Hi everybody, welcome to this week's quick tips video. My name is Milton and I work for the academic team at British Council Mexico. We are producing this series of videos called Quick Tips in the lead up to BBELT 2023, which is an English language teaching conference we will be holding, which is very exciting. Today's session is on teaching speaking. Can you upload the presentation, please? Thank you. The session today will be teaching speaking, how to build confidence and to motivate learners into improving their speaking skill. So the objectives for today's video, we will have a very brief summary of some of the challenges that learners face, young learners, teenagers and adults when developing their speaking skills. Then we will provide some quick tips for how to teach speaking, how to set up speaking tasks in your classroom, some ideas for how to build learners' confidence and how to reduce anxiety when it comes to speaking activities and developing speaking skills. We'll also look at some very specific ideas for activities that you can set up in your classroom to practice speaking. And finally, there'll be some information on BBELT, the best and brightest of English language teaching, the conference, and some information on the discounts we're providing for you. So let's begin. Here internally in British Council Mexico, we conduct surveys on what our students, how they feel, what they're thinking, what their priorities are, what their motivations are. And something which I think is very relevant to today's talk is which skills do students prioritize. As you can see here, 62% of our students prioritize speaking as the most important skill for their development in English language teaching. In fact, it's more than double than the rest. Well, no, it's more than the rest of the skills combined. So students prioritize speaking over other skills. Something that's interesting as well is taken from a Cambridge University Press survey where they conducted a survey into what teachers consider to be the most important skill to practice in the classroom. And this is even higher than what our students say. 70% of teachers, this is a survey conducted of 700 teachers in different countries around the world, consider speaking to be the most important skill and therefore prioritize or try to prioritize their time in the classroom on this. But let's have a little moment of reflection. We know teachers and learners overwhelmingly consider speaking to be the most important skill. However, the speaking skill frequently lags behind the other skills. Students frequently feel more confident with reading, with writing, with listening before they do with speaking, especially those who are learning and practicing outside of an English language environment. So those learning, for example, here in Mexico or in other countries in Latin America, for example. Now, why is this? Before we can really target what we do in the classroom to support learners with the development of their speaking skill, it's important to understand some of the challenges that learners face. There are many different reasons. Here are some quickly summarized. Speaking and self-confidence are interrelated. I don't know about you, but when I have to speak publicly, I often get quite nervous and, quite frankly, scared. I remember when I was learning Spanish, um, I would feel quite confident maybe speaking to one of my friends. But as soon as I was in a social environment where I was speaking to various different people, I felt really, really nervous. So not only is speaking um, difficult in our first language, in the second language we speak rather, it's also something which causes anxiety and stress in our first language. So the two are interrelated. Um, Students who suffer from social anxiety or shyness, for example, often participate less in speaking activities, and as a result, um, have less practice, experiment less, are less free to develop. It's also important to consider, especially in countries such as where I am now in Mexico and other countries here in Latin America, and specifically, but of course around the world, learners have limited exposure to both implicit and explicit language learning opportunities. What do I mean by that? So, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, opportunities to practice speaking in a real world setting. And the lack of these opportunities can have an impact on motivation and confidence. It's also important to consider that more often than not enough time is dedicated to speaking as a skill in most curriculums. A lot of time is dedicated to linguistic points such as grammar or vocabulary. A lot of time is dedicated to writing. Um, and while there may be some speaking activities when in a class, when you're looking at a grammar point or a vocabulary point, the actual skill of speaking, so focusing on aspects such as fluency, accuracy, different speaking sub-skills such as repair strategies, paraphrasing, and things like this are not featured as frequently as perhaps they should be in most curriculums. Another thing which I think we can probably all agree on is finding the right topic to engage students in speaking practice can be quite challenging. More often than not, I find that the speaking activities that appear in the materials that I use in the classroom, while the actual activity might be quite good and well set up, sometimes I notice that the topic itself is not something particularly motivating for learners. So there's lots of things we need to consider. We need to think about the topic, dedicating more time to the actual skill, providing opportunities, providing space to practice, considering how self-confidence and speaking are interrelated. And there's a lot of things to take into consideration as a teacher to ensure that students have the best learning environment they possibly can to develop their speaking skill. So let's get into some of the skills. Hopefully, the tips, some of the tips, excuse me. Hopefully, some of these ideas I'm going to suggest will provide you with some very clear ideas of how to tackle these challenges that learners face. So let's begin with some general tips for teaching speaking. Allow more time for informal conversation. What do I mean by this? Not all speaking tasks or speaking activities need to have a very, very specific objective. Not every speaking activity needs to, for example, practice the present perfect or to practice idioms. Allow more time for chit chat. Allow a space for students to have a conversation at the beginning of the class, at the end of the class, to reflect on an activity where you as a teacher are not really necessarily testing the student in their speaking activity, but just providing them a space to speak freely, informally, and to converse. Give sufficient practice time. This is something which I've learned, the hard way. Students will often say they're ready for a speaking task, and then it gets to the moment and they freeze or they struggle. Ensure as a teacher, when you're setting up a speaking task, give students some time to plan what they're going to say, to think about what they're going to say, and even to practice. This practice can happen in their head. I mean, that's a valid way of practicing, kind of going through the motions in your head. But it could also be with a partner or in a group before they do the bigger speaking activity. Something that's absolutely vital is creating a positive, judgment-free environment. Creating a space, a secure space where learners do not feel, to minimize all possible triggers of anxiety. So, for example, you as a teacher, you can be very careful about the way that you correct and give feedback. You don't need to correct every single mistake, as that can have an impact on motivation and the desire to speak. Also, think about the activities that you're doing. Make sure they're fun and enjoyable. This will encourage learners to be more relaxed when it comes to the moment of speaking, because they'll be more motivated to participate. Encourage learners to focus on the task rather than the talking. What do I mean by that? As you probably have noticed, when I'm speaking now, sometimes I make a mistake. Sometimes I reword what I'm going to say. But the important thing is that I communicate this information to my audience, to you guys. By focusing on the purpose of the task, what do learners have to do? Do they have to be able to call someone to get some information? Do they have to be able to express their idea? So focus on their competence in actually achieving that objective, rather than the words that they're using at any given moment. And also, as a teacher, one of the biggest things that's so important to do is to provide plenty of feedback. The more feedback we give, the more insight learners have into where they currently are in terms of their development of speaking, and they can focus on what to improve. Now, feedback, I think, is absolutely vital. So I've created an extra slide on giving feedback on speaking. So how do we give feedback on speaking in a positive, constructive manner? So help build confidence in your students through praise. It's quite interesting. I observe a lot of classes, and one thing that you notice when you observe other people, and perhaps it's more difficult to notice in your own teaching, to reflect in your own classes, is the language you use with your students. One thing that I've noticed when I've recorded myself teaching a class is that I always say, great, okay. I could be a bit more diverse in the praise that I give. There are more words than just great. You could say that was very good. You spoke very clearly. I really liked your ideas. It doesn't always have to be focused on the actual language, but it can be focused on the content. You provided some very interesting insight onto this topic. You added a very important aspect of the topic in your contributions. So think about the way that you're praising. It can be focused on the language, but it can also be focused on content. Another thing that was one of the things I think about a lot is the actual word feedback. Feedback, of course, is the word, right? But I think the word itself perhaps is a bit counterintuitive. I think we should be thinking of it as feed forward. Okay, so it shouldn't be feedback. Shouldn't be like an assessment. It shouldn't be a way of scoring somebody. It should be providing insight into how they can improve in the future. What can you do better next time? So kind of thinking of feedback as something to improve on in the future, rather than on what you did well or badly in the past. Making it doing it in a timely and a private manner. If students do a speaking task, try to give them feedback in the moment, or if that's very difficult, soon after. The longer you leave it, the kind of more out of mind it becomes. Make it private. Receiving feedback can be quite daunting. So do it in a way that the recipient will really digest and take it on board. And make it part of a developmental dialogue. What do I mean by this? So if you give feedback on pronunciation in one class, in the next class, try to give some follow-up feedback. If you notice that they're making a mistake with a certain vowel sound or with intonation, and you give some feedback, if they correct this in the next class, praise them on that. If they've made some progress, but there's still something to focus on, give them that feedback. So try to not give feedback in an isolated way. Try to make it part of an ongoing conversation that you're having with your students. And incorporate self-reflection. The more independent learners are in terms of the way that they can identify their strengths and the areas to work on when it comes to speaking, the more confident they will be in practicing it outside of class. Give them some authority over their own progress. Also, an important part of speaking is reducing anxiety. We all have a student in our class who is shy. I'm sure all of us at some stage of our life have felt anxiety at some point before having to speak, whether it be in our first language, in L1, or our second language, whether it be public speaking, at a meeting, calling someone on the phone, having a difficult conversation. We've all felt this is perfectly normal to feel some sort of anxiety before speaking. So some general tips: provide plenty of planning, preparation, and practice time. So the more time students have or learners have to prepare for a speaking task you've set up, not only plan what they're going to say, prepare the actual words they're going to use, and then practice maybe in their head first, maybe in pairs, maybe then in groups, and then as a class, the more confident they're going to be later on when they have to do the real world task. A tip that works quite well for me when I am planning on delivering a presentation, something that I do in preparation quite frequently is memorize every single word for the first 30 seconds. Why? Because once I feel that I've had a good start, then I feel more confident later on in the presentation or later on in the activity that I'm doing. It also gives me some time to settle my nerves. Because I've memorized it, I'm not thinking about how nervous I am. I'm just kind of letting it all go, and then I've had some time to settle in. Try to encourage a positive mind frame. It's important to remember sometimes that most people want you to succeed when you're speaking. They don't want you to get nervous and to stumble and to feel uncomfortable. They want you to feel comfortable. Remember that. People are much less judgmental of mistakes in a foreign language than we sometimes think. I remember being terrified of making mistakes in Spanish, but it actually became a source of making friends. I have a lot of my friends think it's quite funny when I make a mistake, and in a non-judgmental way, and it's a way of actually building relationships, I've found. A quick tip: start speaking after inhaling. So when you're short of breath, this can add to the feeling of anxiety. So breathe first and then start speaking once you have the air in your lungs. This can reduce that feeling of nervousness. And of course, experience builds confidence. Repetition of tasks, repetition of activities, repetition of role plays, of different repetition of routines that you have in your class, repetition of reflecting on your own speaking skills, repetition of the way that you prepare what you're going to do when you say. The more practice, the more practice that you give people, the more confident they're going to be. Some general activities to practice speaking. So we've looked at general tips for the classroom. We've looked at the feedback that we can give. We've looked at how to reduce stress. Now let's look at some activities which can be adapted or implemented in a class to practice speaking. Now, one of the best ones is role plays. I love role plays. I think they're really great. I think they're a great resource in class because you can make them very, very specific. You can make them very directed at a certain type of speaking task. So, for example, role playing a job interview, and we've all been there, right? But you can also think about the skills that you're using in the role play and make it a bit more light, right? So sometimes what I'll do with one of my business classes that want to practice interviews, I might go through the general class that I would for an interview, and then I might change the interview a little bit. So interviewing a celebrity, interviewing someone famous from history, interviewing, you can get a bit silly with as well, interviewing a dinosaur, interviewing a prehistoric human or whatever, you can get really imaginative there, and the skills are the same, whoever you're interviewing, right? So role plays is a great resource. Questionnaires. The questionnaires can take on many different forms. Of course, we do a lot of questionnaires in real life. We frequently participate in surveys. We frequently ask, for feedback. But this can be done in many different ways in the classroom. One of my favorites questionnaire activities is find someone who. So you might put five bullet points find someone who was born in Mexico City. Find someone who loves salsa dancing. Find someone who hates pulque, or whatever it might be, right? This is a great activity to kind of warm up, perhaps to a specific language task. It's a great activity to practice it at the end of a class. And it's a great activity to help build relationships and bonds within students within the class. It can be quite formal, or it can be quite informal, however you decide to set up. Debates. Most people love engaging in a good debate, and debates can be a perfect speaking activity for all levels. I hear many people say you can't do debates with A1 or A2. I strongly disagree. Teach them I agree or I disagree, because and you're giving them the tools to be able to have a basic debate, but a debate nonetheless. Dialogue building. This can be done in many different ways as well, of course. So you can set the context and give the two people who are going to be involved, and you can ask the students to build the dialogue from scratch, or you can give them the first part of the dialogue and ask learners to continue the dialogue. One of my favorite activities is to give the last phrase in a 2-minute dialogue. So, for example, this is the last thing that is said in a 2-minute dialogue. For example, I'm never talking to you again, or this is the last time. You ask students to prepare the 2 minutes which leads up to that final phrase. What you can do with dialogue building is that you can get them to write it down, to prepare it in pairs, to practice it, then adapt their dialogues to note form, so they're doing it in note form, and then completely getting rid of all notes, all prompts, and performing it in front of a class. An information gap. For those of you who don't know, this is where normally this is done in pairs or in groups. So you have one pair, student A, with a text with some information, and student B with the same text but different information. They have to complete each other's texts without looking, only by exchanging text, only by exchanging the information through asking questions. So what this activity really helps do is, for example, develop the ability to ask questions, the ability to focus on particular items of grammar. It can be done in many different ways. I'm sure you have an information gap exchange activity in the course that you use. It's a classic activity. And student presentations. so many of us have to deliver presentations in the real world. So the sooner we're encouraging young learners and teenagers to present whatever they've been doing, the better. This is great for so many reasons, because it encourages things like group working, collaboration. There are many different forms of speaking being used in the development of a presentation. So first, kind of informal chit chat of what you're going to do, actually preparing the slides and agreeing and disagreeing with your team about what the content should be, and then when it actually comes to the actual presentation, which is rehearsed, which is practiced, and is a form of public speaking. Well, it is public speaking. The great thing about that is that you're getting many different dynamics in there and many different opportunities to practice different skills in speaking. So there, I hope you found those ideas useful. Please do write in the chat about any of the ideas that you have to motivate your students to speak more, to practice speaking, and to help learners develop their speaking skills. Please do share your ideas in the chat. I'll be looking at that shortly, and I'll do my best to comment. And yeah, let's get a debate around this going. But now let's move on to the very interesting bit about BBELT. BBELT, as I said at the beginning of the talk, is the best and brightest in English language teaching. It's being held on the 17th and 18th of February. It's online. The theme of today's conference is moving forward and learning together. It's a fantastic conference, BBELT. Just a bit of information about it. There are over 90 academic presentations, forums, talks, and workshops this year. Some of the speakers are from Mexico, but we also have speakers from other countries in Latin America and from Europe as well. We have very, very experienced speakers, also less experienced speakers who are conducting some form of action research. There's almost all sorts of things to listen to this year. If you're interested in joining, this is a great opportunity to showcase your brands, your products, your services. There will be participants in this event ranging from decision makers, educators, researchers in the field, publishers. So it's a great opportunity to network and to meet like-minded people in the same industry. BBELT connects teachers in exchange of ideas and best practices, and it's a great opportunity for teachers to meet other like-minded teachers, other teachers in the same industry, and to share ideas, to network, and to see what other people are doing, right? So if you haven't yet registered, right here you can get a 60% discount with this code. So PRM202311. Here at the bottom of the screen, you can see the link to where you can register for BBELT. And once you go through the registration process, there will be an opportunity for you to input this code to receive your 60% discount. This will also be in the chat, the links. And finally, just to round off, I will be continuing to be delivering these quick tip videos every Wednesday at 6 o'clock Mexico time for the next 4 weeks. Every week we'll be talking about a different subject. If you found this talk useful, please do come to some of the following sessions. Please do let your colleagues, friends, and peers know about these videos. And the more engagement we can get, the better, right? So thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you found it useful, and I hope to see you next week. Have a fantastic week, everybody. Goodbye.